This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Minter. The Card: A Story of Adventure in the Five Towns, by Arnold Bennett. Chapter 1. The Dance. 1. Edward Henry Machin first saw the smoke on the 27th of May, 1867, in Broome Street, Bursley, the most ancient of the Five Towns. Broome Street runs down from St. Luke's Square straight into the Shropshire Union Canal, and consists partly of buildings known as pot banks, until they come to be sold by auction, when auctioneers describe them as extensive earthenware manufactories, and partly of cottages, whose highest rent is 4 and 6 a week. In such surroundings was an extraordinary man born. He was the only anxiety of a widowed mother, who gained her livelihood and his by making up ladies' own materials in ladies' own houses. Mrs. Machin, however, had a speciality apart from her vocation. She could wash flannel with less shrinking than any other woman in the district, and she could wash fine lace without ruining it. Thus, often she came to sew, and remained to wash. A somewhat gloomy woman, thin, with a tongue. But I liked her. She saved a certain amount of time every day by addressing her son as Denry instead of Edward Henry. Not intellectual, not industrious, Denry would have maintained the average dignity of labour on a pot bank, had he not, at the age of 12, won a scholarship from the Board School to the Endowed School. He owed his triumph to audacity rather than learning, and to chance rather than design. On the second day of the examination, he happened to arrive in the examination room 10 minutes too soon for the afternoon sitting. He wandered about the place, exercising his curiosity, and reached the master's desk. On the desk was a tabulated form, with names of candidates and the number of marks achieved by each in each subject of the previous day. He had done badly in geography, and saw 7 marks against his name in the geographical column out of a possible 30. The figures had been written in pencil. The pencil lay on the desk. He picked it up, glanced at the door and at the rows of empty desks, and wrote a neat 2 in front of the 7. Then he strolled innocently forth and came back late. His trick ought to have been found out. The odds were against him, but it was not found out. Of course it was dishonest, yes, but I will not agree that Denry was uncommonly vicious. Every schoolboy is dishonest by the adult standard. If I knew an honest schoolboy, I would begin to count my silver spoons. All is fair between schoolboys and schoolmasters. This dazzling feat seemed to influence not only Denry's career, but also his character. He gradually came to believe that he had won the scholarship by genuine merit, and that he was a remarkable boy, and destined to great ends. His new companions, whose mothers employed Denry's mother, also believed that he was a remarkable boy, but they did not forget, in their gentlemanly way, to call him washerwoman. Happily, Denry didn't mind. He had a thick skin, and fair hair, and bright eyes, and broad shoulders, and the jolly gaiety of his disposition developed daily. He did not shine at the school. He failed to fulfil the rosy promise of the scholarship, but he was not stupider than the majority, and his opinion of himself, having once risen, remained at set fair. It was inconceivable that he should work in clay with his hands. 2. When he was 16, his mother, by operations on 1.5 yards of Brussels point lace, put Mrs. Emery under an obligation. Mrs. Emery was the sister of Mr. Duncalf. Mr. Duncalf was town clerk of Bursley, and a solicitor. It is well known that all bureaucracies are honeycombed with intrigue. Denry Machin left school to be a clerk to Mr Duncalf, on the condition that within a year he should be able to write shorthand at a rate of 150 words a minute. In those days mediocre and incorrect shorthand was not a drug on the market. He complied, more or less, and decidedly less than more, with the condition, and for several years he really thought that he had nothing further to hope for. Then he met the Countess. The Countess of Chell was born of poor but picturesque parents, and she could put her finger on her great-grandfather's grandfather. Her mother gained her livelihood and her daughter's by allowing herself to be seen a great deal with humbler but richer people's daughters. The Countess was brought up to matrimony. She was aimed and timed to hit a given mark at a given moment. She succeeded. She married the Earl of Chell. She also married about 20,000 acres in England, about 1/5 of Scotland, a house in Piccadilly, 7 country seats, including Sneyd, a steam yacht, and £500,000 worth of shares in the Midland Railway. She was young and pretty. She had travelled in China and written a book about China. She sang at charity concerts and acted in private theatricals. She sketched from nature. She was one of the great hostesses of London, and she had not the slightest tendency to stoutness. All this did not satisfy her. She was ambitious. She wanted to be taken seriously. She wanted to enter into the life of the people. She saw in the 250,000 souls that constitute the Five Towns a unique means to her end, an unrivalled toy. And she determined to be identified with all that was most serious in the social progress of the Five Towns. Hence some £15,000 were spent in refurbishing Sneyd Hall, which lies on the edge of the Five Towns, and the Earl and Countess passed 4 months of the year there. Hence the Earl, a mild, retiring man, when invited by the Town Council to be the ornamental Mayor of Bursley, accepted the invitation. Hence the Mayor and Mayoress gave an immense afternoon reception to practically the entire roll of burgesses. And hence, a little later, the Mayoress let it be known that she meant to give a municipal ball. The news of the ball thrilled Bursley more than anything had thrilled Bursley since the signing of the Magna Carta. Nevertheless, balls had been offered by previous mayoresses. One can only suppose that in Bursley there remains a peculiar respect for land, railway stock, steam yachts, and great-grandfather's grandfather. Now, everybody of account had been asked to the reception, but everybody could not be asked to the ball, because not more than 200 people could dance in the town hall. There were nearly 35,000 inhabitants of Bursley, of whom quite 2,000 counted, even though they did not dance. 3. 3 weeks and 3 days before the ball, Denry Machin was seated one morning alone in Mr Duncalf's private offices in Duck Square, where he carried on his practice as a solicitor, when in stepped a tall and pretty young woman, dressed very smartly, but soberly in dark green. On the desk in front of Denry were several wide sheets of abstract paper, concealed by a copy of that morning's Athletic News. Before Denry could even think of reversing the positions of the abstract paper and the Athletic News, the young woman said, "Good morning," in a very friendly style. She had a shrill voice and an efficient smile. "Good morning, madam," said Denry. "Mr Duncalf in?" asked the young woman brightly. Why should Denry have slipped off his stool? It's utterly against etiquette for solicitors' clerks to slip off their stools while answering inquiries. "No, madam. He's across at the Town Hall," said Denry. The young lady shook her head playfully, with a faint smile. "I've just been there," she said. "They said he was here." "I dare say I could find him, madam, if you would." She now smiled broadly. "Conservative Club, I suppose?" she said, with an air deliciously confidential. He too smiled. "Oh no," she said, after a little pause. "Just tell him I've called." "Certainly, madam. Nothing I can do?"